Good morning. Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. I want to say thank you so much for joining us and taking time out from your busy schedule, which probably includes things like going to work and shopping. We want to talk today about what we should be doing to close out the year end. Normally when we hear about closing out the year end, we tend to think of some accounting transactions, but we're going to today take a more broad view of what it means to close out the year end as it relates to nonprofits. All right, so if you're here watching, please type your name, let us know where you're from, let us know also what you're doing to help prepare your organization for fiscal year end. We're going to do a presentation, and if you have any questions while I'm speaking, please feel free to post your questions, post your experiences, post your comments in the chat room. I will respond to the comments after the presentation. All right, so without further ado, I am going to share my screen and go into the presentation. Okay, just bear with me. I need to get the presentation. All righty. Again, we are talking about what we should be doing for the fiscal year end. This is Valerie Leonard, and we're going to share with you some tips on closing out for the year end so that you can, in fact, start the next year on a really positive note, hit the ground running. You want to finish strong and hit the ground running in January. So before we do that, we want to talk a little bit about Nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders, and we have shared a safe space where our members can communicate about things that they probably wouldn't feel so comfortable talking about publicly as it relates to their work environments. We try to share as much information as we can so that they can get the inside scoop on the latest developments in nonprofit management. And our mission is to train the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders, and we do that through consulting, we do it through coaching, we also do it through courses and live streams like these. And the overarching goal is to give our members the tools that they need so that they can hit the ground running and be competitive. You want to make sure that, not only are they building their own skills, but they're developing strong organizations in the process. And our vision is to train up to 50,000 nonprofit leaders between now and 2033. You can visit nonprofitutopia.mn.co to join our community. You can visit nonprofitutopia.com so that you can find out more about us. A little bit about myself. I have probably close to 30 years of experience in nonprofit management. I used to run a nonprofit organization, and as you know, I'm the founder of Nonprofit Utopia, as well as the host for our podcast, the Nonprofit Utopia podcast. We'll be coming through in earnest in January. We took a short hiatus to start some other programs, but we'll be back in January live on Blog Talk Radio. And as for me, I specialize in community and organizational development. Got some serious experience teaching with University of Illinois in their nonprofit management program, as well as Roosevelt University teaching social enterprise. And the experiences I use to cross-pollinate and really inform my practice. So we're not going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time here today. We're just going to go over a checklist of things that you might find helpful and The checklist will also depend on where you are in your level of development, and it also depend on what your fiscal year end is for your organization. So we're going to talk about checklists for fundraising as well as finance, compliance, and legal. All right, so as it relates to fundraising, um, you want to, if you have not done so already, you might consider starting an impromptu online fundraiser. And this can be done through a number of methods. You can use GoFundMe. You can also use other peer to peer strategies, such as enlisting your colleagues, your board members, friends, and family to raise money online on your behalf, or to host another type of fundraiser. But the thing is to get your peers to actually raise funds for you. You could also engage in the old fashioned telethon, like we used to see on television. And these are things that have been proven to bring in cash relatively quickly. I've been in emergency situations where I didn't know where our money was going to come to close out the year, and I've had really good success with organizations that I've worked with, developing letters to get people to give, and also developing telethons. The next thing you want to do, and this is not necessarily in any particular order, is just a list of things that you should be doing. You want to close out your annual fund. And before you do that, you always want to say thank you, and let people know how their money is being used. You want to send an acknowledgement letter. And again, this is another opportunity to let people know how their money is being used. The first thing you might want to do, when you thank your donors is, send an email or either a telephone call, and then follow it up with an acknowledgement letter. And in that acknowledgement letter, not only are you saying thank you, but you're also demonstrating the impact of the gift. And you also want to indicate, the value. If it was an in-kind contribution, you want to let folks know what the value of their contribution was so that they can use it for tax purposes. And then you want to also clean up your database for your for your funders and for your donors. Any new donors you get, obviously, you want to add them to your database, and you want to try to keep centralized records, and also create a system where you can easily segment the people in your donor base. All right. And then the next thing you want to consider is an annual report. And with technology, the good thing is you don't have to always rely on a graphic artist. There are a number of tools that you can use to have a nice fancy cover, fancy layout. One tool I like to use is Canva, and you can get a free account or you can get a paid account. And the one of the differences between the paid accounts and the free accounts is with the paid account, you get to brand your colors, use your brand colors, as well as have access to even more graphics and photographs. And there are a number of other features, but that's all we care about for right now. But you want to have your annual report, and you want to include things like a letter from your CEO, the financial results. You want to include lots of pictures and human interest stories. You want to have infographics that will tell a story in terms of, I guess, a combination of pictures and data that will demonstrate impact. And not only do you want to mail out your annual report, you want to post it on your website. So even in your absence, people will see your organization's annual report. And obviously, the annual report is something that needs to be approved by your board of directors. And now we're going to talk about your financial checklist. And I got this checklist from Patriot, and this is really good for folks who are in accounting. And if you're an executive director, you need to make sure that this stuff is happening in your finance department. All right. You need to gather financial statements. So those are your most recent financial statements, as well as statements in the past. You want to check them for accuracy. You want to check out the trends and respond accordingly. You want to collect past due invoices, because cash flow is key here. You want to collect forms. And when we talk about collecting forms, that's making sure that any contractors you have all of their tax identification information so that you can issue a form 1099 before January is out, and then they can use that for their income tax purposes. All right. You want to also make sure that you check payroll. Make sure that you are paying payroll taxes and the appropriate amounts have been withheld. If not, there is HELL to pay. The IRS will collect their money. All right. You also want to make sure if you're selling any products, and some nonprofits actually do sell products, which would make them have to hold inventory. This could be things like t-shirts, mugs, or calendars and that kind of stuff. If it's not digital and you're actually holding it in storage somewhere, you have to account for it in inventory. And also, too, if you have a physical space and you're getting ready for the year end, and this is also assuming that December 31st is your year end. I know a lot of nonprofits actually have a different fiscal year end, but it's not uncommon to have December 31st as your fiscal year end. You also might want to, if you're a large enough organization, this is also the time where you do an inventory of all of your property, plant, and equipment so that you can do your depreciation calculations. You want to organize your business receipts, make sure that you're capturing all of your revenue and all of your expenses, right? So you also want to organize, in addition to those receipts, you want to do, make sure your invoices are backed up um, with make sure that any invoices that you have that you are expecting payment for are backed up with any expenses and other information that you need. And then you also need to reconcile your bank statements. And actually, you do your reconciliations every month. You do your financial statements and reporting every month. But at the end of the year, you want to just double down on your data collection efforts to make sure that you capture as much data as you can so that you can count it for the current fiscal year. And also, while you're doing that, you want to make sure that you project your cash flow. That's really, really important, because, sometimes our financial statements tell us that we have XYZ amount of revenue coming in, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have that much cash on hand. So, in addition to preparing your financial statements and doing your bank reconciliations, you need to understand how much cash you have. So, your bank reconciliation is going to be where you start. That'll give you your cash balance for the month, and then you want to project any expenses that you might have, any revenue that you might have from now until December, so that you can understand, how you're going to finish up. And if you're in a situation where you have a deficit, this exercise will help you to, get a full, um, capture fully what your situation is, and then you can make decisions accordingly, cutting costs or generating revenue at the last minute, right? And then you want to make those decisions based on what you find. So not only are you projecting cash flow for from now until December, but you're projecting cash flow for the next year because next year starts in what, 3 weeks? So you want to make sure that you hit the ground running and know where you are financially so that you can act accordingly. Also, during this process, you want to prepare a budget. Again, this is if your fiscal year end is in December. Sometimes you have a fiscal year in June, so um, this might be a good chance to, make sure that you're checking out how you're doing budget versus actual, and then make your uh, decisions accordingly. That's if you have a fiscal year other than December. But if your fiscal year end is in December, you're actually going to be preparing your budget and finishing out that process so that you're ready in January. So your budget, you're going to have a program budget. You're going to look at your budget for operations and administration. And when we talk about administration too, make sure you include money that you need for fundraising. So often when we're starting off our new organizations, we don't include the cost of fundraising. And if you have capital, so that could be property, plant, or equipment, anything that you have that has a life of more than 1 year, you include that in your capital budget. You want to prepare next year's fundraising plan. So you want to update your case for support. And we have a video. Go to Nonprofit Utopia channel on YouTube, and you'll see videos on developing a case for support as well as for a fundraising plan. And you also want to make sure that any fundraising plan you do is in alignment with your strategic plan, is in alignment with the program that you're having. Make sure it's in alignment with your budget and cash flow projections. So your fundraising plan obviously should be prepared not in the vacuum by the people who are raising money, but by the entire team. So this would be fundraising staff, this would be financial staff, executive staff, and program staff. And obviously, or maybe not always so obviously, you got to make sure that any fundraising plan you have is in fact cleared by the board of directors, because the board is legally liable for everything that goes on in the organization. And then we're going to look at operations. And operations are those things, just think of it as anything that's not program. The bread and butter of our organizations are our programs, right? But anything that is not a program, it could be marketing, it could be communications, it could be technology, unless you have somehow integrated the technology budget with the program budget, but all those things that provide support, right? Oh, and excuse me, guys, I want to make sure that my background is intact. So you also want to conduct an organizational assessment. And really, you should be conducting an organizational assessment every year. Want to get a sense for where you are in terms of your capacity and your best practices. So you will be assessing things like your board strength, financial strength, program strength. And then, once you conduct that assessment, then you act accordingly. See what areas you're strong in, what areas you need shoring up, and then you improve on those areas. And those assessments can also be used in developing new programs, developing strategic plans, and the like. And speaking of strategic plans, you want to look at if you've got a 3-year strategic plan, do a reality check and make sure that you're still on track. If you're not on track, this might be a good time to look at it and see what you need to do to either get back on track or revise the plan altogether. So a strategic plan is basically a plan that is going to position your organization for changes in the environment. So the difference between a long-term plan and a strategic plan is the strategic plan takes into account changes and how you're going to respond to those changes, whereas long-range planning assumes that whatever conditions are in existence today are going to be in existence 2 and 3 and 5 years from now. But at any rate, especially during this pandemic era, you want to make sure that you have a strategic plan that responds to the current environment and COVID 19. And you want to do that without neglecting your core programs and services. It might mean you have to develop new ways of delivering your core programs and services. And it also might mean that you have to take on additional programs and services that you would not have but for COVID 19. You want to have an annual meeting, and that is if your fiscal year ends in December, right? And your first month of the year of your year is January. So you want to have an annual meeting, and at this meeting, you want to conduct an election. You want to approve any changes to your bylaws. You want to approve any changes to your bank information and all of that stuff. And then also make sure that you approve your budget. Those are the main items that need to be on the agenda for the annual meeting. And make sure that you document all of your meetings through minutes. So this is also a good time to look at your minute book to make sure that you have minutes for every board meeting that you have, because um, make sure that you have it for every meeting that you have, because the agendas are important, but not only the agendas, but most importantly, your minutes. Those are legally binding. All right. You also want to make sure that you're in compliance at the federal level, as well as with your funders, as well as at the state and local levels, if your state and local governments are doing, if they're requiring any reports from you. So when we talk about compliance, that just means you're conforming to the standards of, say, your standards of the funder. They may have reporting standards. The IRS obviously has reporting standards. Your state has reporting standards, etc. So for the IRS, we want to make sure that you have Form 990. And Form 990, that is your information return, and nonprofits have to file Form 990 in lieu of a Form 1040 for taxes. So it's an information return that gives information on your financial performance, as well as your programs and services and governance. So there are questions that ask about your board involvement. It also wants to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest, and if there are, they want to be sure that you have policies in place to rectify those. You'll also want to concern yourself with payroll taxes. One of the leading reasons for the IRS shutting organizations down is failure to pay payroll taxes. So make sure that you are up to speed on your payroll taxes. And if you have any penalties or interest due, make sure that you pay those. And depending on what state you're in, you're going to have to do an annual report for the state of, at least the state of Illinois. I don't know what it's like for other states, but the annual report for the Secretary of State is basically letting them know, who your current board of directors are. And you want to make sure you're in good standing. And you don't have to do this in December necessarily. It all depends on when your organization was created. So this annual report is due, I think, the month prior to your anniversary of being created. But you want to make sure that you're in good standing regardless of when this report is due. So being in good standing means that the uh, Secretary of State has on file your last year's annual report. All right. So you also want to be in contact with your local state Department of Revenue. You want to be current on things like payroll taxes as well as sales tax exemption. And for the state of Illinois, you also want to be in touch with the Illinois Department of Employment Security to pay any unemployment fees that you might have and unemployment insurance fees. And next is the Attorney General's office. And for the Attorney General's office, you have to make sure that you have filed your annual AG 990. So that is their annual report. And that is the state's equivalent of the Form 990. And if you have not done Form CO1 or Form CO2, which is basically putting the Illinois Attorney General's office on notice that you're doing fundraising, you have to fill those forms out as well. And those are one-time forms only. All righty. And then from a legal perspective, make sure that, again, that you have your bylaws up to date and they're responsive to, your latest needs, and, things like, your structure for the board, term limits, and all of that stuff. Make sure that your policies are in place. Policies like conflict of interest, whistleblower policies, and make sure that any legal document that you have is in compliance. All right. If there are any questions, you can feel free to post right now. I'm going to check out the comments. And then if you want to follow up, you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. Make sure you follow us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. All right. So this is the end, and I'm going to stop sharing and then field any questions that you might have. Alrighty, so are there any questions or comments? If there are any questions or comments, please feel free to post. I don't see any comments at this point. So I want to say thank you so much for joining us. You can see a replay of this on YouTube. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.